Jury nullification is legal. Do not let Luigi go down for this, because let's get real, it's awful odd. Even if he did it, none of us give a damn about the man that died. His wife, maybe a few of his friends, not the rest of us, because what they did, what they've been doing, is even worse. So remember, jury nullification is legal, because they're most likely going to put him on trial in New York
Dr.
City.
Jack Kevorkian was acquitted in 3 trials in which he helped terminally ill patients end their lives. He was convicted of second-degree murder in a 5th trial after a 4th ended in a mistrial. And some consider O.J. Simpson's acquittal in 1995 for the murders of his ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman as an act of jury nullification. So could it happen in Luigi Mangione's case?
And Jeanette, I've never seen so much sympathy for an accused murderer. Never. And I've been doing this more than 20 years. It's just, I mean, there's so many reasons why, which I'll get into, but I'm sure the comments below on Law and Crime, you're going to have people that think that he should be freed, even though they believe that he killed Thompson, the United Healthcare CEO. And some of it may be their own issues with health insurance claims and prior authorizations and denials. A lot of people have frustrations with their health insurance company or the industry in general. And then the other reason is, let's be honest, here is someone who is smart, comes from a very rich family, is good looking. Now he's famous. He has sort of everything in terms of what people are attracted to. So both in terms of a sympathetic, attractive defendant, and by the way, I'm not condoning violence at all, and a victim who is less sympathetic, and the whole industry that is maligned and disliked. I think this is a very real possibility in this case, and something that District Attorney Alvin Bragg in Manhattan has to be concerned about.
They've been putting out, Nima, so much information about this case. Yes, it's a high profile case. I get that. And they see that, oh my God, there is so much anger at corporations and the health insurance industry over this, that there are people who do not care that Brian Thompson was murdered.
I'm big on TikTok too, spend a lot of time there, and you're absolutely right. I mean, overwhelmingly, it seems like people there are supporting Luigi Mangione, which I would never think was possible. And, you know, and I think part of the issue with what you're talking about is all the resources that have been spent on this case. And again, Brian Thompson is a human being. He absolutely did not deserve to die.
Absolutely
his wife,
not.
or he was estranged from me. He has kids. We can't have this type of, you know, vigilante justice, even if you don't like the healthcare industry. But still, the resources that have been spent on this case, people on TikTok are saying, well, what if this was someone who wasn't a CEO and wasn't a millionaire? You know, how many murders happen in New York City every year that are unsolved because they don't bring in the FBI and the governor isn't talking about it? How many trafficked women and people of color? So it's almost the backlash the other way, because, and I understand why you can't have this type of lawlessness and assassination, execution in broad daylight in Midtown Manhattan, just for safety reasons, for public relations reasons. But people are saying, well, what about my loved one who's missing? Or what about my crime that's gone unsolved? How come the government isn't spending those types of resources on those other cases?
That's a legitimate question. You know, I was doing some research and trying to go back in recent memory and looking at cases where jury nullification took place. And when you kind of Google it, you don't really find that many. However, there are people who think that the O.J. Simpson case is a prime example of jury nullification, because the jury in that case, there were jurors interviewed afterwards who said, yeah, I think he did it, but this was for Rodney King. It was payback for Rodney King. So that, in some respects, people saw that as a sign of jury nullification, despite the fact that there were issues with the investigation and, you know, the Mark Furman aspect of it, the Marcia Clark aspect of it, the you know, if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit, all that jazz. So people look at that as maybe an example of jury nullification, but you don't really see it happen all that often. Also, another example was Jack Kevorkian. He was acquitted, and that was on camera as well, assisted suicide. So can you think of any other cases where it would be an example of jury nullification actually happening?
I think those are two of the best examples, because oftentimes, even when we have a shocking jury verdict, jurors don't come out and say, yeah, I think he did it, but I decided to completely disregard the law and the judge's instructions. Most of them don't do that. But I think OJ is probably the best example. And obviously one of the most famous cases in American history, because you had not necessarily a defendant who was really sympathetic, but I think people in Los Angeles were really upset at the Rodney King verdicts. I mean, the first not guilty, and even in the federal case, there were still some not guilties. Only a couple of the officers were convicted. I mean, that was shocking because it was caught on video. And I think more than that, you have Furman, you have the LAPD, just the horrible racist evidence that came out. They really wanted to punish law enforcement in that case. So even though they weren't a party necessarily, or because they were investigating the case, and I think the jurors were so fed up with the corruption and the racism in LAPD, and Rampart happened around that time as well. I mean, jurors wanted to send a message that, listen, like, we're not going to side with someone that we don't like. We're not going to side with LAPD. Jack Kevorkian, of course, assisted suicide. A lot of people had a lot of sympathy for him. They thought that here's someone who's helping people during the most dire time in their life. So they wanted to send a message that we did not think that this case should even have been prosecuted. So obviously, assisted suicide, there's people on both sides that have very strong feelings about it, but it's not really too dissimilar from health insurance. There are a lot of people that have very strong feelings about it, and that may come out during jury selection and more importantly, deliberations.
Jury nullification, probably, if you're a defense attorney and you're going for that, I assume it's all about picking the right jury. And it's going to come down to jury selection and really feeling out those jurors during voir dire.
Oh, no question. You want those stealth jurors, right? Jurors that are going to be on your side, but aren't going to tell the prosecution and the judge that they're on your side. So that's the type of juror that can hang a panel. That's the type of juror that could potentially cause them to acquit. Now, obviously, we know as prosecutors, I'm a former prosecutor, I'm going to take that perspective, we need to get 12 out of 12. So if we even get one of those types of jurors, those sympathetic jurors to Luigi Mangione on the panel, that's a huge problem, because it doesn't matter. If you're just looking at the evidence in the case, Anjanette, it's really overwhelming, right? You have the video, we've talked about that, his DNA on the water bottle near the scene, there's a fingerprint apparently on the burner phone. You have the ballistics that match as well. So you got fingerprint, DNA, ballistics, lots of forensic evidence. You have
a letter claiming, the manifesto claiming responsibility.
Yeah. So you got the motive there. It's him. So it's a very strong case in terms of the evidence. I don't know what Mangione is going to do, if he's going to push the case to trial, if he's going to take a plea. Obviously, New York doesn't have the death penalty anymore, hasn't had it for 20 years. So I don't know what motivation he'll have to take any type of plea. Might just roll the dice, but it's really a strong case in terms of the evidence that we have. And obviously we cover a lot of murders on Law and Crime. Some of them are cold cases, some of them are tough cases. This is an easy case in terms of the evidence, but in terms of the sympathy and the potential for jury nullification, not an easy case at all.
He's a smart guy. Okay, valedictorian of his class, Ivy League school. He's got a bachelor's and a master's. He planned this whole thing out. I mean, he planned it out. He's smart. Okay, he's smart. I think he, if he indeed is the guy, he's accused at this point. He's charged. I think he wanted to get caught. I mean, he wrote the manifesto. He knew he was eventually going to get caught. Do you think he mapped this out in his mind? Like, do you think he wanted to go to prison and was willing to go to prison? Or do you think he's got some kind of plan?
Yeah, he is obviously very smart. I haven't seen someone as smart as him maybe since Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. And obviously, it appears that Mangione had read Kaczynski's manifesto. I think in some ways it's a little bit different, obviously, a different time. And we talked about the technology, right? Kaczynski was living off the grid, no electricity, no water. So he was able to kind of conduct these very smart letter bombings over the course of many years. But Mangione, obviously, he was smart. He certainly had a plan, right? He had the fake IDs, he got the burner phone, the escape path, and all that. He obviously knew where Thompson was going to be at that moment, right? He had enough sophistication to print a 3D gun. But ultimately, the question I have is, you're right. Why admit to it in writing when there's the possibility that you're going to get caught? There's a manhunt out for you. And why don't you leave the country, right? You have, all this cash, you have some foreign currency as well. Why are you hanging out in broad daylight at a McDonald's in Pennsylvania when you're the most wanted man in the United States? So maybe he did indeed want to get caught. Obviously, we don't know much about him. We saw some yelling while he was being transported to his first court proceeding. So maybe there's some mental health issues. Maybe he's trying to send some sort of message here. But I think we'll know a lot more about him in the coming days and weeks.
His lawyer said, his lawyer told CNN that he was mad he didn't have a lawyer. And that's what that was about. But then he got into court and saw he had a lawyer, and that kind of calmed him down. So I thought that was really interesting as well.